Hi, this is Subramaniam Shankaran from ISSS. The most important aspect of the data privacy or data protection for EU GDPR, UK GDPR, PDPL, PDPA, DPDP, etc. is the consent. Consent is an agreement. Okay. Now, there are different types of consent, and there are also some attributes to consent. In this video, we're going to have a look at everything. Yeah. Now, what is the consent? Consent is a permission for something to happen or agreement to do something. Now, the agreement to do something is an most apt definition for a consent with respect to the data privacy. Now, if I'm going to approach you and ask you, can I have your email address and can I have your mobile number and can I have your first name and last name? You can will ask me, okay, so why do you want to have that? Okay. Now I'll say, okay, we want to collect your email, we want to collect your, the mobile number, first name and last name, so that we can send you an intimation whenever, let's say if I'm a hospital, whenever your medical report is ready, or whenever your package is ready, or whenever your parcel is actually ready. Okay. Now, this is something which I can ask you, and it's up to you to say yes or no. Okay. When you say yes, you are agreeing for me to do something. This is actually called as a consent. There are 4 different types of consent in the data protection. We are going to have a look at each and every one now. Yeah. Affirmative. Let me move my video aside. Yeah. Affirmative, explicit, or active consent. This type of consent that is required an individual to clearly and deliberately agree to processing their personal data by some active communication or action. This is actually called the privacy by default. If the consent is actually not given by the data subject, okay, you are not supposed to process the information legally. Okay, this is highly recommended, and this is what you need to actually follow. This is in line with actually called as a privacy by default. Now, these are the examples for affirmative consent, signing consent statement on a paper form. Okay, paper form is applicable for EU and UK GDPR, not for DPDP, because DPDP in India is going to act only if it's going to be a digital personal data or digital data, not the paper form. Picking an opt-in box on the paper or electronically, clicking an opt-in button or link online, selecting from equally prominent yes/no options, choosing the technical setting or preference dashboard setting, responding to an email requesting a consent, answering yes to a clear oral consent request, but this needs to be recorded. So one thing we should always understand is there are 2 types of documents, okay, when it comes to, or material evidence, when it comes to any management system, including the ISO 27701, otherwise known as Privacy Information Management System. There's something called as an, 2 types of documents or evidence. One is actually called as a retained documentation. Okay, retained evidences. Evidences are actually retained for, justification or a proof of doing something. But there's something called the maintained documentation. Okay, maintained documentation, the policies, procedures, etc. They are all configurable item. They have got version and release control themselves. So they are all actually called as the maintained documentation. Retained documentations are the evidences. Okay, even if it is going to be an S to a clear oral consent request, okay, that needs to be recorded, because if there is going to be an audit tomorrow, we need to have a proof that he had told me orally. You can record the conversation, but you can record the conversation after the consent from the data subject. Okay, you can ask him. So we need to record this as a proof that you have agreed to the processing. So can we record? If he's going to say, the data subject is going to say yes, then you can actually record it. Now coming on to the next part of it. Okay, next one, implicit, implied, and passive consent. Now there is no explicit, okay, there is no explicit consent actually request from the data subject. Okay, so implicit consent is an example. For example, I'm applying for a job. When I'm applying for a job, that means that I am okay for the recruitment company to call me and then call me for interview or send me an email. So that is actually called as an implicit and a passive consent. Yeah. Next is an opt-out consent. The opt-out consent, where the type of consent that assumes that individual agree to the processing of the personal data unless they indicate otherwise. Okay, this is actually not recommended. Okay, because this is not privacy by default. Okay, example, not choosing to subscribe a newsletter. Okay, now if the tick on the newsletter is not done automatically, or if it is done automatically, not choosing to subscribe is something that you need to opt out. Okay, there are a lot of web pages and mobile applications also by default. If there's a radio button, there'll be a tick mark in it. Okay, this is called as an opt-out consent. This implicitly you're assuming that they will agree to it. Okay, opt-out consent is where you can untick the radio button and opt out of it. Okay, unticking the previously ticked checkbox, not consenting to save personal details, rejecting the use of cookies. You are prompted with an option: allow all cookies, or you can select, or you can just say no. That's called as an opt-out consent. What is an opt-in consent? By default, this will not be tick. You need to choose, okay, to actually do it. Even the opt-out, okay, not every time the tick is automatically made. Okay, when the second point says untick the option, that means the tick is already in there. They assume that you are going to say okay for it. Okay, so that's when we have a problem. Opt-in is there's no tick mark anywhere. You have to say yes or no. Okay, there are a lot of websites where there are newsletters pertaining to different aspects are given. You need to choose what you want. There is an opt-in consent. You may choose nothing or you may choose few. You can also choose everything. Okay, that's going to bombard your mailbox with a lot of information. But opt-in consent basically says that you can opt in to a specific, okay, whatever you want, whichever is of interest to you. Okay, Google also sometimes they push the notification asking you, is it okay? Do you like it? Yes, no. Okay, there's an opt-in or opt-out consent form. Coming to the next one. Okay, examples of opt-in consent. Signing a consent statement on a paper form, again, applicable for UK EU GDPR. Ticking an opt-in box on the paper or electronically. Clicking an opt-in button or link online. Selecting from the equal and from there are no options. So exactly what we had seen on opt-out is what we are actually seeing here. Next is informed consent. Informed consent is I'm explaining you the implications, what you are actually going to do and everything, and then you are putting in your consent form. Now, there are a lot of examples that we see in our daily life, but the most common one is in the hospital. Okay, like, you go for an emergency, there's a surgery or something. Okay, they're going to make a scan. Okay, the patient needs to undergo a scan. The guardian or the parent needs to read through the consent form and put in their signatures. Okay, that is actually called as a informed consent. So predominantly in the healthcare industries, okay. So you can actually go through most of the surgeries, blood transfusions, anesthesia, X-rays, chemotherapy, advanced medical tests like biopsy, vaccinations, blood tests. Okay, in fact, when we took the COVID vaccine in the year 2020, so we had given our consent for it. Okay, so we put in the consent, then we take the vaccine. Okay. On the consent must be freely given on the voluntary basis. That means you should not force the data subject for the consent. It should be specific, informed, and it should be unambiguous. Consent freely given. Okay. So it's like you cannot force the data subject for the consent as we had seen. Okay, so the example for it, an online furniture store requires the customer to consent to the details being shared with another homeware store as a part of the checkout process. This is not necessary. Okay, it's a different store right altogether. The store is making a consent a condition for the sale. By sharing the data with the other store is not necessary for the sale. So the consent is not freely given and is not valid. If you look at the next scenario, which is bold here, the store also requires the customer to consent to their details being passed on to the third-party courier company. You book something on Amazon, Flipkart, or Souk. Okay, whatever it is. Okay, then it's an online store. They need to pass on your details to a third party who will deliver the package to you. Okay, you need to actually give it. Okay? That's a freely given consent. Now, what do we mean by specific and informed? Controller's identity, who is getting your data, purpose of the processing, and the processing activity, and right to withdraw the consent at any time. Okay. If you look at the privacy policies which are listed online by most of the organizations, okay, you can use the Google Doc. Okay, you can use the privacypolicy.doc or privacypolicy.html. You can see the privacy policy. These things will be there. Controller's identity, purpose of the processing activities, and right to withdraw the consent at any time. Okay, usually I take an example of Schneer. Okay, I take an example of Schneer. Newsletter. subscribe. So I will use information you provide on this form to send you the cryptogram newsletter. You can change your mind at any time by clicking unsubscribe link in the footer of any cryptogram email, or by contacting me on this email address. I use MailChimp as a mailing list provider. So this, in our example, this is like a courier company. By clicking on the subscribe, you acknowledge the information you provide will be transferred to MailChimp for processing. If you don't want, then you can actually unsubscribe by clicking on the unsubscribe button or sending an email to sneer.com. So this is something which is very unambiguous in the consent. You give it and we are going to use it for this purpose. If not, you can anyway choose to opt out. Okay, example of unambiguous. Individual submitting an online survey about the eating habits. By submitting the form, they clearly indicate the consent to process the data for the purpose of survey. Submitting the form will not and however be enough by itself to show valid consent for any further use of information. I'm giving you details about myself so that you can do a research and suggest me. Like, in fact, there is an app that I found yesterday. It's a healthy living, okay, healthy eating. So you can choose what you want. You can be a vegetarian, you can be a vegan, you can be a non-vegetarian. Okay, you choose whatsoever way that you want to actually order the food from by giving the eating habits. This app can use your information only for that purpose, nothing more and nothing less. Thank you very much. So this is Subramaniam from ISSS. You can reach us on sales@isss.org.uk for any inquiries. Okay, you can call us on this number. Okay, for anything that you wish to contact us for. Stay safe. Thank you very much. Subscribe to this channel for further videos. Cheers then.